Yeah.
As you may or may not know, I'm quite into powerlifting, which involves three basic lifts. Well, not basic, they're pretty advanced. They include the deadlift, the bench press, and the squat. Part of this video is just going to be me explaining the physics behind each of the three lifts and how stuff like power work comes into play, and how most of the lifts, the benefits come from acting against gravity.
Yeah.
The first of the three lifts is the deadlift, in which you have a weight on the floor, and you're trying to pick up the weight. The reason why it's called deadlift is because it's dead on the floor and you're lifting it. So how does gravity play a role? Well, you're counteracting gravity the entire lift.
Totally.
Because the bench press is actually a little bit more easy to imagine. You're laying down on a bench and you are lifting the weight from above your head down to your chest and pushing it back up. So the reason why it's so easy to bring it down to your chest is because you're not exerting any force, rather the force of gravity is bringing it down. And then when you're trying to force it back up, you have to counteract the force due to gravity the entire way up, which is why it makes it such an effective exercise.
Okay, start now.
The third and the last of the three major lifts in powerlifting is the squat, which kind of is basically the same principle as the bench. You start with the weight on your shoulder, and then you sit into a squat position, and then with that entire part of the lift, you are going with the force of gravity, and then the part where you counteract gravity is on the way back up, where you have to force the weight, overcome the force due to gravity.
Go.
To get it back. So, to demonstrate the laws of physics in terms of the three lifts, let's start with something like the squat, where you have force is equal to mg plus big mg, with g being the acceleration due to gravity, and little m being your body weight, and big M being the weight that you're trying to press. So, let's take for example, little m is equal to 70 kilograms, and big M is equal to about 100 kilograms. So, it becomes about 700 plus 1,000, so you get a total force of 1,700 newtons acting on you that you would have to overcome on the second half of the lift. Another thing to consider when you're talking about the deadlift, the squat, and the bench press is the work done, which is a very simple concept to apply to each of the three lifts. Take, for example, deadlift, where you're lifting a weight off the floor. Let's just say D is equal to 0.5 meters. So the work done would be equal to the force that we previously calculated times 0.5 meters. And since cosine theta represents the direction of the force, the angle between the force and the direction vector, since we're applying the force in the same direction that the weight is being lifted, it's cosine 0, which is equal to 1. So it's just the work done would be equal to force, whatever the force is, times the distance lifted, and you get the amount of joules of energy it took for a lifter to lift that weight up for that height and with that force that he exerted. Another thing to consider is power. Power is defined as work over time, which means we can just simply take whatever the joules of energy that it took for the lifter to lift that weight, divided by the time that it took for him to lift the weight, and we get whatever the power is behind that lift. And one of the big things about powerlifting, as you can tell by the name, is to increase efficiency. So it's not like strength, it's not where you're lifting for strength, where you're trying to take your time with the lift and stuff. Instead, you're trying to maximize efficiency, so you're supposed to be pumping out the reps as quickly as possible. Therefore, the shorter the time interval, the greater the power behind the lift. We can also consider to find out how fast the lift is being conducted, we can do something as simple as conservation of energy, which is E final equals E initial, which is equal to kinetic energy initial plus potential energy initial equals kinetic energy final plus potential energy final. So to find the speed, well, we know that kinetic energy is equal to 1/2 mv squared, and U, potential energy, is equal to mgh. For most of these lifts, actually, let's take the bench press for example. You start the lift with the weight in the air, but with zero velocity, zero kinetic energy, because it's not moving, it's at rest. So you start with a initial potential energy, which is equal to the final kinetic energy right before it comes to rest at your chest. So plugging in mgh equals mv squared, 1/2 mv squared, dividing out the m's, you have velocity equals 2 times gh, square root of 2 times gh.